in this illusion with the economy where the government, the feds, the corporate media, they're all making us believe that the economy has been improving since 2008. And they keep coming out with these stats, and they kept pushing the idea that housing is going up. Now, the reason why they continually use the idea that housing is going up, because people feel good when housing is going up, because on paper, you have more money. Doesn't really mean you have more money, but people feel good that their house is going up. And what they do hope for is that you take that money out and you go spend it in retail. And we're not seeing a lot of this, because what is happening is they're only able to push the bubbles up in 20 cities. And now the bubbles are popping. And if we go back in time and we go back to prior to 2008, when we had the Great Recession, during that period of time, the corporate media, the Fed, the government, they were all out there telling us how everything was fine. Everything was contained. There were no problems. The stock market was like at 14,000 points. People were like, this is incredible. People were looking at housing, saying housing will never go down again. It will just keep rising. And people were believing that everything was great. And people took a lot of money out of their homes. They had home equity line of credit. They bought cars. They did other things. And a lot of people got into housing with adjustable rate mortgages. And the illusion continued on. But the people out in the real world realized that there were problems, because corporations started to lay off people. And people were being laid off in 2007, 2008. It was very quiet, very slow, and people were having a very difficult time finding jobs. Now, this is when we were at a point in time when unemployment was very, very low. Almost where we are today. Actually, it's pretty much where we are today. And people were saying, hey, I can't find a job. And actually, the jobs that I'm going for, they want me to take a lower salary. Something is wrong here. And people realize this, and they feel it way before the collapse hits. Now, we've been seeing signs all over the place where we're seeing these problems, but people actually feel it way before the government, way before the Fed, way before the corporate media tells us we're in a recession, we're in a depression, the economy is collapsing. So if the U.S. economy is performing so well right now, why can't 51 million households in the United States afford basics like rent and food? Now, a new report was just released by United Way Alice Project shows that the gap between the wealthy and the poor in this country is perhaps the biggest that has been in any of our lifetimes. In some of the wealthiest areas of the nations, homes are now selling for up to like $100 million. But meanwhile, tens of millions of families are barely scraping by from month to month. In general, the U.S. economy seems to be performing better than expected so far in 2018. But the ranks of the poor and the working poor, the middle class, well, they're getting poorer. We're already seeing on CNN and other corporate media outlets that, wow, things are getting more expensive. We're feeling inflation right now. Now remember, the fuel prices have been they're moving up. So that means the food producers and everyone else, they're going to start raising prices all over the place to make up for what they're losing. And the people right now feel the economy. They feel that there's something wrong. So if 43% of all Americans cannot even afford the basics, what does that say about the true state of the U.S. economy? Well, we know that many Americans, they have lost their high-paying jobs. So they got 1, 2, maybe 3 part-time jobs. We know salaries, they haven't gone up the way they used to. Actually, wages and salaries have been declining. So in America today, 66% of all jobs pay less than $20 an hour. That's 66% of all jobs. How can a middle-class family live on $20 an hour? It would be very, very difficult. If the family was 4, if the family had 5, It'd be very difficult to live today, especially if you're making $20 an hour and the price of food continually rises, gas prices continually rises, and everything else goes up. And we're going to see inflation. We're going to see inflation hit. This is why people have more than one job. This is why the unemployment numbers have been manipulated in this fashion to make you believe that we're in this incredible recovery. Remember, they count a part-time job as a full-time job. So if somebody has two part-time jobs, they have two full-time jobs. That's how they calculate this. Now, what's very interesting about all of this is if they lose that part-time job, guess what? It might not be counted as a job lost because it depends on how many hours you work and how much pay you receive. Each state is different. And if you don't meet the requirements, you're just not counted. Very interesting. And we could see right now that people are feeling the pain. Now, corporations, they can buy back their stock. They can pretend that they're making a profit. All they have to do is manipulate their books. It's very easy to do. We've seen many, many companies do this. They make it seem like everything is fantastic until it's not. We know that the retail shops, they have been going out of business. A lot of people have been laid off. And we can see that manufacturing, it really hasn't improved, hasn't really gone anywhere. Because think about this. The central bankers, the deep state, those in power, they spent many, many years shipping manufacturing out of this country, shipping jobs out of this country, moving everything out of this country. It didn't happen in a day, in a month, in a year. It happened over many, many years. I remember hearing, and I'm going back maybe 20 years now, where they said the middle class is going to disappear. And here we are today, many years later, where the middle class has disappeared because we're seeing the spread between the very wealthy and the poor. So the people, they're feeling the hurt, even though the corporate media, the government, the Fed, is telling them that, no, you're not feeling the hurt, don't worry about it. And of course, what they can do, using all the different programs they have in government, they can make you feel like everything is okay because you're receiving funds, you can feed your family. A lot of people are running out of that money during that month period when they're getting food stamps and things like that, but they try to make you feel like everything is great. That was part of their plan. Because what we see happening right now is that this system is breaking down very, very quickly. And it seems like the Fed, who's really controlling the economy, actually manipulating the economy, they tried everything. I mean, they're at the point where they had to use money printing in the very end to save everything to then crash the system because they weren't prepared, because they didn't have a narrative that they could have gone with during the 2008 crisis. And they wanted to keep this going a little bit longer to set everything up. Here we are at this point where they have nothing left. They set everything up the way they wanted it. They know how to control the collapse. They've taken control of the stock market. They've taken control of the statistical numbers. They've taken control of the banking systems. They've taken control of pretty much everything, and they have everything manipulated right now. And since they have everything manipulated, they're able to control everything up to a certain point. Now we're starting to see things break down. Countries are moving away from the dollar. Countries are moving to cryptocurrencies. The petrodollar is under threat. There is now a petro-yuan. It has something like 12% of the market already, and it just came out. I mean, really think about this at this point. Because what they wanted to do, and how they were going to control the narrative, is they were going to bring us to war to cover all of this up. Can they do this at this point? They can try, but I don't think they're going to get there. So they're trying to figure out a way where they can blame this on a group or the president or anyone else, where they can say, hey, this is why it all fell apart. You need to keep our system. And at this point, the people need to band together and push the idea that we need to look into what the central banks have been doing. Now, this is the perfect opportunity to do this. I know there's petitions out there where it says audit the Fed. I know out in Europe they have protests. But when it doesn't affect anyone's wallet, their pocketbook, their actual savings, their hard-earned money, nobody does anything. Everyone sits back. Everyone says, oh, let someone else handle it. Not a big deal. But when we're in a collapse scenario and people are struggling and people aren't making money and people aren't able to feed their families and people want something to happen, this is the best time where we can get people together to push the audit the Fed bill to take the central bank down. Because if America and the world is suffering under all of this, then they will band together. And this is going to be the perfect opportunity to do this. And while we're doing this, you need to be ready for it. You need to have some type of protection. You need to have gold and silver. You need to invest in cryptocurrencies. Actually, what you're doing is you're trading in your paper currency for cryptocurrencies. You're trading in your paper currency for gold and silver, so you can hold something that will protect your wealth, that will ensure your wealth, and you can stabilize yourself during this period. Because this is going to be a transition like we've seen back in 1970. The only problem, it's going to be much, much worse, because back then we were coming off the gold standard, which was a stabilized system. Yes, they were creating funny money while we're on the gold standard. This is why Nixon came out and said, "Ooh, there's speculators in the market. They didn't want to hand back the gold to all the countries," and we came off the gold standard because countries started to realize what the U.S. was doing, because the central bankers were ready to move. The central bankers are very patient. They're very methodical. They don't do things very, very quickly. They wait, they see, they readjust their plan. And they don't care if it takes 20 years. They don't care if it takes 30 years. Because, first of all, they're always putting countries into debt. They always have the control. And they're above the law. Right now, really nothing can affect them, because the rule of law really doesn't affect them at all. So I think what everyone needs to do is prepare themselves, get ready, and once this thing hits, everyone, not just here in the United States, but around the world, we all need to band together, because everyone's going to be hurting, and we need to push this on the government, and we need to push them in this direction. That's the power of the people. When you can get everyone